After his retirement, Sam returned to Marymount to once again, you guessed it, pull weeds. By then there was a nonprofit board, and he has served as president for the past 20 years, relying on his planning and management skills working in nonprofit organizations. Sam's focus continues to be holding Agnes's promise to keep Marymount through Hellfire and Damnation. Sam?
Jai Baba. Thank you, Margaret. Hellfire and Damnation, the theme. When Agnes Baron, co-founder, lifetime caretaker, and one-time owner of Marymount, first met Avatar Mayor Baba in 1952, he said, "First of all, I want Agni to know that only Agni, God, and Baba know what she has gone through in these 6 years to hold Marymount for me." Agnes looked at him in surprise and said, "It was no trouble. Baba, no trouble at all." She had completely forgotten all her problems in his presence. And I didn't tell him anything. I said, "Trouble? What do you mean, Baba?" And here I had been dying of anxiety. And when Baba said trouble, I thought, well, how silly. I didn't have any trouble. It just completely vanished. It's a fact. So the whole time in his presence, all my problems meant nothing. Everything was just wiped out. Agnes later talked about that time at Marymount. For 6 years, I stayed at Marymount, and I slaved like a fool. I had to pay the mortgage. All I had for income was a patch of strawberries, and I would go down and peddle them from door to door in Ojai, and they were very sweet. During those 6 years, 1946 to 1952, she continued. I had these people and professors even coming up, and somebody would say, "What are you doing? You don't know that guy. Why are you staying with him?" And she would say, "I don't know. I did not know." Then Agnes met Mayor Baba and said, "There are no words to describe it. It was so fantastic. All my doubts just flew out the window." The first thing Baba did was to open his arms and put my head on his shoulder. Something out of this world happens to you when Baba puts his arms around you. It's indescribable. What I saw sitting on the couch and what I felt was sitting on the couch were two different things. Without any more rationalizing, I accepted him 100%. The love just poured out of him. His vibrations were like a hummingbird. You couldn't see the vibrations, but you knew the vibrating. You felt that in Baba. His eyes were so full of compassion, just utterly irresistible. I was hooked. That was it. I didn't care about obedience. I didn't give a damn about anything like that. He was utterly irresistible. Afterwards, I was consciously watching him to see if he was going to make any mistakes. But deep down, I had already accepted him. Agnes' journey to Marymount started just after she returned from Europe, as the U.S. was nearing entry into World War II in 1941. Agnes, who was 34 years old at the time, was disillusioned and disheartened at what she had seen. She came to California and found inspiration and meaning studying Vedanta. But she left the Vedanta group in Hollywood after 2 years, accusing the Swami of being a hypocrite and a fallen yogi. She went to live at another Vedanta center in La Crescenta, California, but was asked to leave because her typing late into the night disturbed the other residents. They suggested she go next door to another retreat, and that's where she met Jean Adriel and Alexander Markey, who were disciples of Mayor Baba. They had established the New Life Center in La Crescenta in late 1944 and dedicated it to Mayor Baba. Agnes professed no interest in Mayor Baba, but she was invited to live in a cottage there, and she decided to stay. Jean told Agnes she was a writer too, and asked Agnes to edit the book Avatar. While Agnes found much of the writing too sentimental for her taste, she was nevertheless impressed by the central subject, Meher Baba. However, Agnes swore to herself not to be taken in. Later, sometime in 1946, Jean told Agnes that Meher Baba had written from India that they should find a place 2 hours away from a big city. One afternoon, the group was going to go to the Ojai Valley, and they invited Agnes along for the ride. Agnes was the one who spotted a curious stand of trees atop Sulphur Mountain and insisted that they investigate. When Agnes jumped the fence to explore the property that would become Meher Mount, she crossed the threshold to her destiny in work and service. And it was for the rest of her life. Jean and Alexander closed escrow on the property on July 31, 1946. Agnes, still uncertain about Meher Baba, moved in with the group. And she just wanted to be the outdoor man. So I learned how to prune fruit trees, how to run a tractor. I did all that stuff that I didn't know before, Agnes said. And after 1 year, decided to go to India. And then Jean decided to go to India. And Jean made everybody else leave. There were about 10 people. And she made them all leave and wanted me to stay. I said, I'm not interested in your Baba. Why should I stay? Jean said, I want you to stay until I find out what Baba wants. So finally it ended up with her going away and my staying on. I was here alone, keeping the place. Agnes said the reason she agreed to stay is because she thought it would be only a month or so. The next thing Agnes knew, Jean had returned to Hollywood and came to Meher Mount saying she was going to sell the place. Agnes still didn't know what to do, and Jean told her, well, just wait until I can sell Meher Mount. Sometime later, according to Agnes, Jean turned up with a businessman whose last name was Bosberg. He pretended to be interested in Baba, Agnes said. Anyway, to make a long story short, he pulled a very dirty trick. He pretended to be interested in Baba, and he insisted on having the property in his name. As an aside, it's not clear from research to date that Bosberg actually had his name on the property, but Agnes thought he did. And when that was done, Agnes continued, he told somebody else, ha, I played a good trick. I'm not interested in Baba. I just said that to get the property. I'm going to have a big hotel here and going to have all the psychics. Can you imagine anything worse than that? And when I heard that for the first time, I wrote to Baba. I knew that somebody was lying and cheating. So I wrote him the whole story because on principle, I hate anybody who tries to cheat somebody else. So I wrote a really polite and formal letter. Without thinking, I just wrote down, and Baba, if you want Meher Mount, I'll keep it for you through Hellfire and Damnation. I signed it and sent it off. How did I do that? She asked herself when she was telling the story in Mandalay Hall in Meher's office. It's only in hindsight that I see that from the very beginning a little string that Baba had me like a little fish, pulling me along like this. And she pulled. So anyway, I sent it off, and so he had been doing that all this time to keep me to my promise of hell, fire, and damnation. Meher Baba wrote back what she called a very sweet letter, saying he appreciated and loved Agnes very much, and that she by all means should keep Meher Mount for him. I didn't say anything to the man Bosberg, Agnes continued, but I made up my mind that that place is not his. He lied to get it in his name, mind you. Jean had started the Meher Mount board, and he was to be on it. But when he had it with his name, the board wouldn't mean anything. She and he and I were to be on the board. I don't know why I was on it. But anyway, it went on for a long time until finally he kept sending people in, very elaborate psychic people. It was really very weird. And I didn't know what to do, but I only knew that the man was not going to get possession of it. Finally, it came to a climax, and he wrote a letter, and he said, I've been sending a lot of people interested in putting money into the place with me up to Meher Mount. I don't know if he called it Meher Mount or not. And he said, they always come and say, no, they are not interested. Now, what are you doing? What are you and that Meher Baba doing to drive these people away? And he said Baba was a black magician and I was under his powers and all that nonsense. So after a few letters, I got very angry and I wrote him a letter. I said, look, stop writing this nonsense. The place isn't yours. It belongs to Mayor Baba. Make up your mind to that. And I said, from now on, I'm not going to write you anymore. I'm not going to answer any of your stupid letters. And I said, enough. So anyway, I received no more letters, she said. Then John Cook showed up. Around 1948, John Starr Cook was a member of the family of heirs to the Castle Cook of Hawaii fortune. He was a restless young man exploring many mystical, occult, and counterculture movements. He expressed a deep interest in Mayor Baba and offered to help Agnes secure Mayor Mount from the grasp of Bossburg. At the same time, he insisted that to do that meant putting the property into his name, or his family's name. It appears this effort was successful, as it was recorded as in the name of John S. and Wilma V. Belknap Cook, his wife, when it was transferred to Agnes Baron's name on November 24, 1959, as directed by Mayor Baba. Research has not so far turned up county records of an earlier transfer of Mayor Mount to Bossburg or to the Cook family. Interestingly, future scholars can worry about that. Agnes says John Cook secured the property, paid off the mortgage, provided her with several $100s a month for about 6 years. He told her to do as she felt best in operating Mayor Mount for Mayor Baba. In September 3, 1956, letter from Adi Kearani to Agnes, Adi wrote, I sent your letter to Baba, and he informed me through Mani, Baba's sister, that whatever you say about Mayor Mount is okay with him. The letter continued, he deeply appreciates your love and feelings and sends his love to you. Agnes says that in 1952, John Cook came back to Mayor Mount from North Africa. He was paralyzed, and as she put it, something happened to his mind, and he was taking mind-altering drugs. When Agnes called him on his behavior and his drug-taking, he got angry and said he wanted his money back. She quotes John Cook as saying, God has whims, and God changes his mind, and I am God. Agnes reports that with his sister's help, he wrote to Baba for support. And Baba sent a copy of his letter to Agnes, along with Baba's reply to John, in which Baba said, quote, I love Agnes dearly, and I trust her implicitly, and she's staying on at Mayor Mount. Then John and his sister angrily left Mayor Mount. Agnes' account of her 1952 meeting with Baba in Myrtle Beach includes Baba telling her, I don't want John connected with the name of Mayor Baba, with Mayor Mount, that he doesn't have love. Now you must get him out of the picture entirely. But he said, no coercion. And in a November 15, 1957 letter from Adi Kearani, Mayor Baba's secretary wrote, P.S. Dear Agnes, Baba prefers to have the entire Mayor Mount transferred in your name. It took almost 7 years for Agnes to convince John and his wife Wilma to willingly transfer Mayor Mount to Agnes Baron. She said, so I had to pay the whole amount. I had to take on the whole thing, mortgage and expenses again. There appear to be several transactions related to Agnes's efforts to finance the property from 59 to 63. Agnes Baron was 100% responsible for Mayor Mount. She carried that responsibility all alone. She relied on intermittent help from young Baba lovers who visited her, as well as friends and neighbors. One of her ongoing challenges was water. In 1978, Agnes sent me the following letter. Could you come this long weekend, if only for a day? You might not want to stay longer. No water. The pump is off again. As of 3 weeks, everything dying, dismal. I haul up from the spring and some dirty stuff in the bottom of the pool. Trial with Sears on pump, not until 14 September. She was suing Sears for the pump failure. Can't decide whether to go to expensive pulling and buying new pump or drill a new well. This was 1958, mind you. In the walnut orchard and have sweet water, maybe with a windmill. Water has always been an issue at Mayor Mount. There's a well at the bottom of a canyon that was there when the property was purchased in 1946. The water is dense with sulfur and calcium carbonates and bicarbonates. Agnes pumped the water from down in the canyon up to the old swimming pool and used it for the toilets, sinks, irrigation, laundry. When Agnes needed to fill the pool, she had to drive or walk a quarter of a mile to turn the pump on in the well. For bathing, she would lay a hose out on the lawn to warm in the sun and use. For an outdoor shower, Agnes got her drinking and cooking water from a spring about 5 miles away. She would gather up a couple dozen or more empty 1-gallon plastic milk containers, load them in her car, drive down Sulphur Mountain Road to the river spring along Highway 150 between here and Santa Paula. There was a pipe sticking out of the riverbank, and she filled the bottles with that water. And that was her drinking and cooking. The water quality issue was never solved in her lifetime. Later, caretaker Michel Saint-Sulpice, who's the architect who designed the visitor center, wrote in his caretaker's letter of June 14, 1996, to the board, saying, "A new pump was installed inside our well on February 17, 1996. But warning," he said, "the steel casing of the well is breaking down due to corrosion. The well might collapse onto itself one day." That would mean the end of that well. Mayor Mount is now in the process, today, as you see the drilling rig over here, of installing a new well, which should be easier to manage and help ensure reliable water for many years to come. Now, the New Life Fire. We spoke of Hellfire and Damnation. Well, Mayor Mount. Mayor Baba's nickname for Agnes was Agni, a name meaning fire in Sanskrit and fire god in Hinduism. With its capacity to destroy and cleanse, fire is a thread running through Agnes's life. Fire proves a disaster for Upper Ojai homes, read the headline in the Ojai Valley News. On October 14, 1985, the Ferndale fire, whipped by Santa Ana winds from the west, sneaked up the southwest ridge of Sulphur Mountain, and by 9 o'clock on that Monday night, Mayor Mount, an Avatar Meher Baba Center and the home of co-founder and lifetime caretaker Agnes Baron, was ablaze. An accompanying headline said, "Plucky lady watches her memories go up in flames," with that plucky lady being Agnes Baron. The article began, "Meher Mount, a 173-acre ridgetop estate on Sulphur Mountain with panoramic view of the Ventura Coast, the Upper Valley, and the Los Padres Mountains, blessed by a spiritual leader from India and guarded for 30 years by one of his followers, fell victim to the Ferndale fire late Monday night in a near-fatal standoff by a desperate and isolated 3-man crew of firefighters. Agnes Baron, the watchdog of Sulphur Mountain, an 80-plus-year-old woman whom Mayor Baba told to guard the land, who has fought with oil developers and county officials for a quarter of a century, was left shoeless with just the clothes on her back Tuesday after her home, guest home, and outbuildings were totally destroyed. The fire burned everything: buildings, equipment, fences, Baba's tree, and the old woody station wagon in which Agnes Baron drove Mayor Baba to and from Mayor Mount in 1956. When the fire hit Mayor Mount, according to the newspaper article, all available equipment were fighting it to the east and further south in Malibu. Before the battalion chief could even recommend sheriff's deputies evacuate Sulphur Mountain residents, the blaze had crested the ridge all the way to Sulphur Mountain Road. The strong-minded woman refused to leave, saying she'd jump into the unused swimming pool, full of heavily mineralized water, several hundred feet from her residence. She had fought out other fires up there over the years, she says, but when the strike team finally arrived about 9 o'clock, they insisted she get out immediately. "I'm very annoyed with them," Agnes told the newspaper reporter. "Those damn fools wouldn't even let me go back in the house for my shoes." "What hurts me most," said Baron, "is the loss of my documents, library, and Mayor Baba's pictures and writings." Agnes said she had the only known copy also of an obscure Canuni de Lektacagin, an Albanian law book that anthropologist Margaret Mead suggested she check out with another authority who confirmed its rare authenticity, plus many other priceless books, documents, and photos which were burned. Agnes had lived with Albanian bandits in the mountains of Albania, and she had written down their laws. It was amazing, said her friend George Stewart. When the fire started, we were all watching down in Ojai. I tried to call, but the line was down. You could see the flames on Sulphur Mountain. Before dawn the next day, she was down at my gate in her car. She moved in and was more concerned about her dogs and cats than herself. I thought she was going to have a heart attack, a nervous breakdown, a collapse. She didn't. She took it all as another one of those goddamn calamities that happens. She wasn't fixated on possessions. The tragedy is she lost an enormous amount of memorabilia, which would have been valuable to a biographer, he said. We call the Ferndale fire the New Life fire, because Mayor Baba's New Life phase started on October 16th. The fire at Mayermount was still burning right through that date. In the New Life, Mayor Baba literally gave up everything and wandered begging with a small group of his intimate Mandali, explained Bing Heckman. When the New Life fire happened, it literally required Agni to give up everything and start all over. The buildings were burned down, a house, garage, outbuildings. We cleaned up literally tons of debris, filling multiple dumpsters. Agni simply adapted and kept going, and her resilience is part of her story. She just rolled with it. It was never a question of any other direction. To me, Bing said, it was giving up everything. It was carrying on and not missing a beat. There was an assistant caretaker who helped out, Bing remembered, but it's just utterly amazing to see the maintenance of the property and to realize Agnes essentially did that on her own with some help from others. Larry Pesta described his encounter with Agnes after the fire. The following weekend, I flew down to Los Angeles and drove to Ojai to visit Agnes personally and make sure that she was well. I met her in town at the house of a friend of hers, George S. Stewart, who had taken her in after her devastation. Agnes appeared quite composed and peaceful. Walking out near the tree under which Mayor Baba once sat on his famous visit, I felt really sorry for Agnes and her situation. I said, "This must be horrible for you." She looked at me and said, "The important question for you to ask is this. Tell me, could you handle this? I've been burned out. The important question is, will you allow Mayor Baba to burn you out as well, if necessary?" She was not talking about physical fire, but spiritual fire. George Stewart offered Agnes a room in his home, and she stayed there until Bing Heckman arranged for a trailer to be brought to Mayermount for her to live in. He later brought on an even larger trailer where she remained until a few months before her passing. Surrounded by mountains, books, animals, and the indignities of old age, Agnes spent her last years in a tiny bed in the trailer. Ken Cedar, with his brother Len Cedar, cared for Agnes around the clock for the 5 years before her passing. During that time, Ken remembered another fire that came very close to them. I remember turning to Agnes and saying, "We're going to die." Meanwhile, he said, Agnes, dressed in a red robe and moving across the property in her motorized wheelchair, was directing the fire department on where to hook up their fire hoses and use water from the pool to fight the fire. She looked like Little Red Riding Hood. Directing the operation, Ken laughed. The fire was successfully put out before it could reach Mayermount. At one point during the last years of her life, Ken said to Agnes, "Let's build you a house. Let's get you a place that will be safe and healthy." She did not agree to build it for herself. She said, "Build me a house to be used as a center for the visitors who will come." Bing and the Cedars worked with the architect, Michel Saint-Sulpice, to design and build what is now the visitor center, the caretaker quarters. Agnes lived in the center house for several months before she died on July 5th, 1994. So, groups wanting the property. All through Agnes' time at Mayermount, various groups wanted to use Mayermount for their own purposes. There are so many stories, but for instance, there's this short note from Agnes to me in 1983. "Sam, heard of Gustav Ridley? His friend in Ojai contacted me. Sounds like a weirdo. Wants to set up pyramid of copper and metals and broadcast spiritual waves to the world. They'll be asking to build up here, I'm sure." Not all those Agnes encountered were as short-lived or as easy to dismiss. It was fall 1968. Agnes had read in the Ventura County Star about a drug treatment program that was being evicted from a property not far away. She wanted to be of help. It was her practice to look for people in programs that needed help and to visit to offer support. She had no money to give, but would try to link them with services, programs, politicians, whatever, who might help. She saw this as what Mayor Baba would want. Agnes had recently been hearing and reading of Mayor Baba, telling his lovers, including Robert Dreyfus, Rick Chapman, Alan Cohen, to work to get young people off drugs, to avoid a whole generation of leadership being lost. She felt that helping a drug treatment program aimed at supporting sobriety for young adults who had been addicted or seriously affected would be pleasing to Baba. Agnes met with, we'll call him Jack, the program director, and some of the young people who lived there at the place where they were being evicted. She was impressed with Jack, a lean, clean-cut, dark-haired man of about 35. He had an intense gaze. She wanted me to find out what I could and share my impressions of him and the program. She said she was having serious second thoughts about having invited them to live there and wanted another opinion. She said she liked the young people in the program but had qualms about Jack's role and some of the behavior she had observed, including how Jack sometimes treated the people. She said Jack had some of them get jobs in the surrounding area and would collect all their pay himself. He had some of them, maybe they couldn't find employment, making candles, painting paintings, making other things that could possibly be sold. He took all the money and, he would dole out what he felt they could use. He basically directed all the details of their daily lives. I felt completely inadequate to evaluate Jack or his program, but I could not refuse Agnes. A bit nervous, I walked down the well road to the White House. Jack saw me coming, invited me in. The living room smelled heavily of incense, which was infused into these large reddish-brown candles that they made by the dozens, some of which were now burning in the room. Jack was barefoot, wearing only shorts, sat at one end of the couch in a half-lotus position. I sat at the other end. After a brief introduction, he told me that he was on a yogic mission to rehabilitate addicts and those who had become unbalanced due to drugs. He seemed to feel that he was their spiritual leader and guide as well as the director of all aspects of their lives. On reflection, I felt it was no accident that he had 12 followers. I shared all this with Agnes, and she clearly was already having serious misgivings about having invited them to live there. A few weeks later, Jack showed up at the door to Agnes's screen porch, where she basically lived most of the time. She was alone, reading a book and making her customary margin notes in shorthand. She invited Jack in. He stood in that narrow space on the flagstones between the various chairs and side tables, mostly covered with books and magazines lying open to the latest page she had read. Jack said, "Agnes, you promised to give me 5 acres of Mayermount. I have had the papers drawn up for the transfer of the property. Here they are. You need to sign them now because I'm on my way to take them to Ventura for filing." Agnes said, "I did not promise you land. I said there was a possibility if the program worked out here. Besides, I would not sign anything without having my attorney look at it." Jack glared at her. He said, "You need to sign these now." Agnes said, "You can leave them here for me to look at if you want, but I'm not signing anything. You need to leave now." Jack continued to look at her with intense anger for long moments. Then he picked up a wooden chair by its back, lifted it above his head, and smashed it to pieces on the flagstone floor right in front of her. Agnes afterward said it was like looking into the eyes of a mad dog that was ready to attack. She held her eyes steady. Finally, he turned and, leaving, slammed the door. Agnes did not feel completely safe as long as Jack continued to live on Mayermount. She soon informed Jack and the others that they all needed to leave. All the others, who generally liked and respected Agnes, left within a week or two, but Jack remained. He refused to leave. Agnes called the sheriff's office, and an officer, a longtime acquaintance of Agnes, came up, but informed her that the police had no authority to evict Jack. She said that the two of them were looking down toward the White House and discussing it, while Jack was sitting atop his car in front of the White House, staring up at them, angry and defiant. After several more weeks, Jack left, never to return to Mayermount. All who knew and loved Agnes breathed a sigh of relief when it was clear he was gone. Some of us helped clean up the messes they left, which included many foul-smelling candles and the metal file cabinets, which they did not bother removing. We threw the contents in the trash and were not totally amazed to find that many of the things in the file cabinets were eviction notices from previous properties and failure to pay notices for utilities and other services going back quite a few years. This experience did not deter Agnes. To me, this is demonstrates Agnes's childlike innocence in a way. She had a tendency to accept people at their word when she first met them. So if they said they were altruistic, she would believe them until they proved her wrong. So, and we saw this. This was just one example. There are quite a few, but we won't cover them all. But this experience did not deter Agnes from taking her master, Mayor Baba's words about drugs as a personal responsibility. Shortly after this group was gone and their leavings were cleaned up, she began studying drug programs, found a model that looked promising, and with funding from the Ventura County Board of Supervisors, she said she bullied them into it by telling them they hadn't done a damn thing to help, young people with the drug problem. And to get rid of her, I think they funded her program called the Drug Abuse Reorientation and Training, or DART, program to counsel teenagers in 5 different high schools in Ventura County who had been arrested for drug offenses. Professors who evaluated that program found it effective, and through it, Agnes brought a Baba-inspired touch to the lives of many young people and their families. Just after the 1985 New Life fire, a different group came to meet with Agnes about using some of the property for their purposes. The Sufi Order of the West, affiliated with Pir Vilayat Inayat Khan, son of Inayat Khan, and not to be confused with Sufism reoriented, was interested in having acreage at Mayermount set aside for their group. To demonstrate their sincerity and earnestness, they offered to clean up all the debris from the 1985 fire. This in the winter of '86, and there was still debris everywhere from the fire. Fire destroys, but it doesn't burn everything. The group of about 40 people showed up 2 weekends in a row to clean up Mayermount, ordering 5 of the largest dumpsters available. They brought tools, food, worked hard for 4 days, much of it in the rain. There were a few of us Baba lovers in the mix, but it was mostly the Sufi group who did the heavy lifting. During one of those cleanup days, one of the leaders pulled me aside to show me an advance copy of their periodical they called The Message. On page 18 was a full-page photo of Mayor Baba, and then an article, quote, "Help to Others," unquote, by Mayor Baba on pages 19 to 22, which is reprinted from Listen Humanity. They wanted to show a connection between the Sufi order and Meher Baba and their respect for him. Around the same time, the group prepared an 11-page, single-spaced, typewritten proposal with appendices A through E entitled Review and Analysis of Possible Use of a Portion of Meher Mount in Ojai Valley for a Retreat Center. The group wanted to use 68 acres of Meher Mount above Sulphur Mountain Road for a Sufi retreat. The proposal included zoning regulations, related ordinances, strategies with the county and neighbors, and several clauses indemnifying them and holding Agnes Baron responsible if the process did not proceed as they had planned. Quote, any obligation on the part of the Sufi order to Agnes Baron should be contingent on our obtaining what we consider to be the essential permits. If we invest in buildings and then lose a permit or fail to get one for reasons which can be attributed to her, e.g., poor relations with neighbors, other activities which she allows on the land, we must be indemnified. Quote, we need a long lease, at least 50 years, with few escape clauses to protect against any investment in buildings. The lease must run with the land so that our rights are unaffected by change of ownership. It should protect the Sufi order against inconsistent uses of the land and perhaps designate a specific area for Sufi order use only. After the cleanup, the leaders of the Sufi group returned to meet with Agnes about coming to agreement on their proposal. Several of us were there too. We were not encouraging to the Sufis about their proposal, and we urged Agnes not to accept it. In the end, she declined, but blamed some of us for driving the Sufis away. I think she did that sort of tongue-in-cheek. But Margaret and I always thought it was Meher Baba's way of sending help to clean up after the fire, because without their help, it's not clear when or how the place would have been cleared of all the fire debris. Letter from Erich. Agnes's only trip to India was September 1982 to talk to Meher Baba's Mandali, close disciples, about the future of Meher Mount. This trip was funded by Bill LePage because he was eager to help her. He said, I was intrigued with her early history. I liked Agnes. I admired her strength of character that had kept her going despite all the issues she faced. What a wonderful Baba lover she was, he said. In their discussions, the subject always came around to what she should do with Meher Mount. I wanted to help, Bill remembered. We talked about the administrative structure for Meher Mount. She wanted to leave Meher Mount to humanity in general. Agnes wanted Meher Mount in a trust, but she did not want some of the Baba lovers she had known to run the trust. He explained. That concerned me, Bill continued, so I said, let's go to India. I will pay for your fare. She went for it. She was happy that I offered. Bill felt that if Agnes talked with the Mandali, things would get sorted out. Agnes was particularly looking forward to speaking with Mani S. Irani, Meher Baba's sister, and head of the Avatar Meher Baba Perpetual Public Charitable Trust in Ahmednagar, with Erich Jesawala, Meher Baba's close disciple, who for many years had translated all Meher Baba's gestures for the public and worked with Mani in managing the trust. What I didn't realize at the time, Bill said, was there was no resolution in her mind regarding the future ownership of Meher Mount. 5 months later, when Margaret and I were going to India for Meher Baba's birthday in 1983, she asked us to talk to the Mandali again about the future of Meher Mount. I remember when we approached Erich, Margaret said, we were at the trust office in Ahmednagar, standing outside the door of Erich's office. When we brought up Agnes Baron and Meher Mount, he sighed wearily and said, we have the whole world. You could just feel the weight of Meher Baba's trust on his and the Mandali's shoulders. We started to back off, not wanting to add to his burden. Nevertheless, he called us into his office to dictate a letter to Agnes. After the initial greeting in the letter, Erich said, it is of the utmost importance that Baba's land, Meher Mount, be kept in his name. and for his work perpetually. Baba has appointed you his watchdog and caretaker of Mayermount. Through your great love for him, you have kept it for him all these years, through many hardships and obstacles. The fruition of your work is to assure that Mayermount remains active in his service, in his name, for the many generations to come. Thus it is important that whatever you do about Mayermount, see that it remains dedicated to the cause of Avatar Meher Baba. It is important that in any documents drawn out, this is specifically mentioned. Erich repeatedly emphasized how important it was for Agnes to take action. As we discussed when you were here, Agnes, the importance of forming a trust for the property to ensure that it remains his is so great that if it is necessary to sell a parcel of the land to pay for the best legal help in setting up a trust, you should not hesitate to sell in the greater interest of Mayermount. What Agnes absolutely detested, a version of her own hell, was jumping through necessary legal hoops and rules and regulations to get something accomplished. She felt her heart was true, and the bureaucrats and lawyers should just know that and stay out of the way. Erich continued, "We know, dear Agnes, that the legal requirements will be complicated and time-consuming, even exasperating perhaps, but do not get discouraged. It may seem to you that when you do selfless service in Baba's name, you should not need to face so many legalities, so much paperwork. But the Mandali have learned through experience with the trust that in his work it is very important to pay close attention to such things. As you know, after Baba dropped his body, there were rumors and quarrels and eventually lawsuits and court appearances. These things happened because at the time we didn't see the importance of keeping an eye on the necessities, legalistic and otherwise, of managing the trust. Through these happenings, we learned that we must get beloved Baba's work done through such channels." He continued to encourage her, saying, "We know that you will preserve and succeed in this matter with beloved Baba's help, as you have preserved through so many problems in the past. Our loving thoughts are with you as you chart the future course of Mayermount, under his guiding hand in accordance with his divine plan." And Erich reminded her that there were people ready to help. Sam and Margaret are already there by your side to help you legally formulate anything about Mayermount according to your wish and desire. Beside them, you already have a list of Baba people that we gave you from the trust office here who can be now and again consulted and requested to help you. Dear Agnes, having by your side such stalwart Baba lovers who have his cause dear to their hearts, there is no need for you to refer to us any further about the procedures and establishment of the trust. Go ahead taking Baba's name and their advice and do what you think best. Margaret and I never accomplished setting up the nonprofit foundation for Mayermount with her. Soon after we returned, we worked with Bing Heckman and others to set up a nonprofit organization, but we were met with resistance from Agnes. 7 years later, in 1989, Bing Heckman and Ken Cedar were able to set up the nonprofit 501c3 organization, Mayermount Corporation. I think she knew that time was short and things needed to be put in place, remembered Ken. There was no resistance from her, which was not the norm. Everything went along very smoothly, very easily. She allowed things to occur. One of her guiding principles for the future of Mayermount was embodied in her statement, "Baba, you say you are universal, so everyone is going to be welcome at Mayermount." Meher Baba had earlier responded, "Anything you say about Mayermount is all right with me," to Agnes. Agnes selected Mayermount's first board of directors, which included both followers and non-followers of Meher Baba. The purpose of the organization is identified in the Articles of Incorporation. The specific and primary purpose of this corporation is to provide for the betterment of mankind by implementing the teachings of Meher Baba. Regarding transferring ownership of the property, Agnes established a life trust that donated the 173-acre Mayermount property to Mayermount Corporation on her death, but allowed her to live there for the rest of her life. I'll stop here for a minute, just a few more things to say, and wanted to share with you some of Agnes Baron's favorite quotes, things that we heard her say many times that I think kind of are indicative of her personality. And these are things that I heard. I'm sure other people have other quotes that they've heard her say too. But I've heard these quite a few times from her. Things that are real are given and received in silence. That's Meher Baba. Serve him who serves all. Meher Baba. Labels are libels. That's Agnes Baron. You don't go to God in the crowd. Agnes. The true sannyasin, or aspirant, eats whatever is given. That's probably from Vedanta. To work thou hast the right, but not to the fruits thereof. That's Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Take the sword of discrimination and chop off the past. Shankaracharya. Forget yourself in service to others. Agnes would say that quite often. And Meher Baba is the only one who ever satisfied me completely, said Agnes Baron. She also loved, probably above all, the quote from Baba, "One is." So the nonprofit corporation that she established continues today to manage and support Mayermount as a universal place of pilgrimage dedicated to Avatar Meher Baba. All of us are stewards of Mayermount, doing what we can to keep Mayermount for Meher Baba through hellfire and damnation. And your continued support and participation are crucial to that keeping. For me, the spirit of Mayermount is felt in that conjunction between the beauty of nature and Meher Baba's invited guests, whose souls are drawn to his presence here. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.